and we move forward. And we do that by just simply talking about who we are. For those that may not know, our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored by, again, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, AAPRP, which is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan African party that is based in Africa with the objective of Pan Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa. We recognize that is a mouthful for a lot of African people, particularly in this country today, who have swallowed the Kool-Aid regarding the solution to our situation being simply one of entrepreneurship within the capitalist system, building wealth within the capitalist system, drank that Kool-Aid. We get it. But those things are clearly not the solution to the problem that we have. And we are happy and have done so many times, explain why they're not. The solution is our own self-determination based on justice, and we cannot build wealth on a system that's built and maintained on exploiting our mother Africa. That makes us complicit in the crime to want to build wealth in a system that got rich by robbing us. And our solution is that, well, we just want to work within the confines of their thieving system and create some resources for ourselves, not for the masses of our people, because I think everybody understands, like, everybody can't get rich. In order for there to be rich people, there has to be poor people. That's how people become rich. It's because people are poor. Everybody can't be rich. So clearly that's not the solution. So the solution for us is Pan-Africanism, one unified socialist Africa. And I work to achieve Pan-Africanism. It's outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's handbook, the cover of which is displayed on this page. And this program is hosted every Sunday by myself, Ajamu, and my biological, ideological daughter, Dr. Shakura Umi. So to get us started on this topic of an update on Guinea-Bissau, I turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Greetings, everyone. We hope you are doing well. Thank you so much for being with us today. So, if you are asking yourself why we should focus on Africa or why our seminars tend to focus on Africa, we are more than happy to explain that to you today. As you all may know, or maybe this is your first time with us, if it is, welcome. Africa is the national home for the All African People's Revolutionary Party. This is where our organization was founded, but it's also the national home for African descent, African people, and the future of Africa is what will define our future as African people, but also since the birth and civilization of all people comes from Africa, really what happens to Africa defines all of our futures. And it's critical for us to accept this, whether we understand it very carefully or whether we're still trying to break the pieces down and process what was just said. This is still true, regardless of how we feel about it. Coincidentally, a lot of Africans mistakenly accept the propaganda of the capitalist world that our only hope for salvation is identifying with them, assimilating, falling in line, buying into the propaganda, adopting what it is that's being sold to them because the wealth, their wealth, is on stolen wealth. And being able to exist and survive, outside of capitalism is a hard concept, I think, for a lot of Africans to understand. But that's precisely why we need to continue pushing for why we should focus on Africa. And if you really think about it, for the many years that we've been doing the seminar so far, during the month of February, for example, if you notice, we tend to focus on Africans who were born outside of the US. We try to bring light to Africans who we have never talked about before, or maybe you have never talked about before, names that you're not familiar with. Of course, we pay homage to the Harriet Tubmans and the Martin Luther Kings, but we also try to acknowledge the Carlotta Lusumis and the Theodore Gomes, because those names need to be spoken of as well, the Elizabeth Sabekos and the Thomas Sankaras, right? And I think that all of that is by design based on what we just talked about in this slide. It's important for us to understand that the impact that African people have in society is very much contributed to what has happened to the continent. And just like you see on the slide, you see the different materials and the images of those materials and how the fact that they have been exploited, the fact that those materials belong to the African nation, which means they belong to the African people, but the African people do not control the African nation. So therefore, those resources are not being attributed towards the outcomes of African people. The sooner that people understand that, the sooner that they make those connections. And more importantly, the sooner that Africans accept the fact that they are, in fact, African, I think then we'll be able to really have some idea and an understanding of why we talk about wealth so much. Just looking at the image on the slide, clearly you can see how profitable those materials are. And I think that the European colonizer also very much understands that. But if people are walking around not even accepting that they are in fact African, Baba Jamu just spoke to that by saying we're honoring and acknowledging indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere who are actually indigenous to the Western Hemisphere, meaning they descend from this land. African people do not descend from this land. We descend from Africa. And so we shouldn't be walking around saying that we're native. We shouldn't be walking around saying that we're indigenous to Western Hemisphere land. We are indigenous to African soil. And the sooner that we accept that, the sooner that we can start to really build on that, the better off we'll all be in terms of being able to really fight for what is necessary. It's very much okay for us to be aligned and to support the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. It's not okay for us to be embarrassed of our own identity and self-esteem and instead try to take on that of someone else's. Not only is that unnecessary, but it's not helpful to the indigenous people's fight, and it's certainly not helpful to our fight. So we need to continue thinking about that in terms of what that means on a larger scale. And part of us fighting and resisting the colonization and the neo-colonization is having a strong self-esteem of thyself and having a strong acknowledgement of thyself. Next slide, please. Okay, so why you focus on everything except Africa? We can talk more about this in detail, but if you were to consider any smart thief, right? Any thief who is educated, who wants to establish what a consistent method of stealing from you will always include some type of component where they can convince you that the object they are stealing from you has little to no value. That's a very intelligent thief who can take something from you and make you feel questionable about how profitable or valuable the item is that they stole from you in the first place, making you start to second guess, what the impact of that is. The enemies of African people have convinced many of us that the capitalist system they built from robbing us blind is our best effort at progress. And this is what we were speaking to in the previous slide in terms of accepting what the current propaganda is, in terms of accepting what the outcomes are and not assuming that we can fight against it, not assuming that we can resist it, not assuming that we don't have to accept it, right? Like those are all of the motions that the system wants to deconstruct from you and wants to remove from you. If you are too busy trying to fight and resist, then you're not going to really be able to fall in line. And that's what they want. They want us to be good slaves and to fall in line. They want us to follow the rules and go by the book and do all the things that we're supposed to do to be good people in society and to be patriotic and all of those things. But I always ask the question, but how are you following rules in a game that was never meant for you to play and succeed in the first place? How are you following rules that were never designed for you to begin with? Because if that were truly the case, if that were truly, truly, truly the case, none of us would be struggling because our class status would not be a factor into how we can have consistent and stabilized ways to make a means and to earn a living every single day. None of us would be stressed about the impacts of capitalism because we would be okay and we wouldn't have anything to worry about. Every single one of us is worried about something. We might be worried about our health. We might be worried about our family's health. We might be worried about our bills. We might be worried about our job. We might be worried about our car. We might be worried about the fact that we don't have a car and we need a car. All of that is connected to capitalism. Some of us don't have food. Some of us are worried about how we're going to get our next meal. And all of us tuning in right now have at least one thing that is of concern to us. At least one thing. Even if you don't admit it to us, you know we are telling the truth when we say that. That is because of capitalism, you all, because none of us were born into the 1%er family where we can just have everything we want and not have any worries whatsoever, because we're always exploiting the rights of other people and the wealth and items of other people. Because none of us are in that category, of course we're going to have things that are of concern to us, because we don't make enough money to actually be okay to do all the things that we need to do to make things harder for other people. So instead, they're good for us. So because of that, that is the same system that we are also trying to assimilate with. That's exactly what the slide is saying. That is the same exact system. And my question to you is, why would you fall into that? Why would you accept that? Why would you want to assimilate into a system that is constantly stripping you and telling you you're not good enough? Why would you want to continue pursuing that? For those of us that are on a very healthy track in terms of understanding how pain and victimization and manipulation and good therapy, what that means that we are choosing to be in a bad, toxic relationship with capitalism, while capitalism is verbally, physically, spiritually attacking us. And we are giving capitalism consent to do that if we assimilate and if we fall in line. That's what that means. And if you're not willing to tolerate a toxic relationship with a person in your life, why would you be willing to assume a toxic relationship with a system that means you no good whatsoever and only harm? That's the question. And just because society is telling you you need to do that, it doesn't mean you need to do that. This is why it's so important to think for yourself. This is exactly why. It is so important to think for yourself. We must never, ever lose sight of that. We must always think for ourselves, no matter what. Because the minute that we stop knowing why we're doing what we're doing, that means that the system has won. And that means that we can no longer be able to make our own decisions that determine our outcomes. And ultimately, that's why our ancestors fought, so that they could give us that right to be able to do that. We would be immensely disrespecting them if we were to now reverse the time and go back to a period where that wasn't an option for us. So again, we say to you, it is always based on not just your own individual experiences, but the fact that your ancestors sacrificed for you, and the fact that we're trying to build a better world for the children to come after us. If that's not enough, you should understand the importance of thinking for yourself in terms of really identifying with the same system that has constantly worked overtime to harm you and to devalue you. And again, we ask you, and why are you falling so hard to fall in line with that when this system has no means for you to be successful by any means necessary? If that were the case, as I said, you wouldn't have the worries and concerns that you have. And if you don't have worries and concerns, you should ask yourself how many people have been exploited and harmed so that you can benefit on their behalves. That's the question. I will leave by highlighting the image in the bottom right. Very, very powerful. This is the rapper Cameron, and this was a quote directly from him saying, "I am Cameron. I ain't no African." And again, when we think about what propaganda is and representation, language, the importance of all of that, we have to really dig deep into understanding that is exactly what the system wants us to do. The system does not want you to be educated. The system does not want you to practice organizing. The system does not want you to join an organization that is working for justice. But because the system does not want you to do that, shouldn't that be the reason that you do it? Because the system has already proven to you that you can't trust the system. The system is not going to help you get free. The system is not going to help your ancestors get free. So that means it's up to you to think for yourself and to pursue that. This is why joining an organization working for justice is one of the best ways to do that. But if you're not ready to do that, you can at least continue supporting Pan-Africanist organizations that are working for justice, including donating to our African Liberation Day event that is coming up in May, because we are definitely raising money so that we can continue increasing the political education of the masses of people.
Thank you very much. Asante Sana, Medasi. Thank you very much for that. And that's a great, of course, segue into Guinea-Bissau and the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, or the PAIGC. And the PAIGC was founded by Amilcar Cabral, whose picture is in the bottom right of the screen, in 1956. And the PAIGC, or its full title translated, African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, originally, they waged a successful guerrilla war against Portugal. And in 1973, Guinea-Bissau became independent under the governing of the PAIGC. Now, since 1973, Guinea-Bissau has suffered numerous military coups d'etats, and there's been instability. But you have to understand the reasons for that and the reasons why this has been the story of much of Africa, right? Because in 2023, the World Bank, imperialist organization, right? Their interests are in looking at the world as a mechanism to determine how to better control the world. Because the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, if you're not real familiar with those organizations, they're international finance organizations. And what they do is they're funded primarily by the imperialist countries. The United Snakes of America, for example, provides a significant percentage of the budget for the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, along with the United Snakes, the Zionist state of Israel, Britain, France, the usual criminals that you can imagine. These are the folks who finance these international finance institutions. So, of course, although they want to make you think these institutions are there to represent the interests of the world, that's why they call it the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. Really, their purpose is to ensure that the interests of international capital, dominated by the countries I mentioned, that those interests are represented and protected. So when they analyze the world, that's the vision that they're doing that from. What potential is there for uh, additional markets in the world for capitalism to exploit? What are the mechanisms that we need to utilize to set up these territories in a way so that the exploitation of them is easier? The mechanizations are put in place that allows them to be more efficient at creating profitable centers for international capital. That's what they're concerned about. That's what the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank exist to do. So when they say that Guinea-Bissau in 2023 is one of the most resource-rich countries per capita in West Africa, and you have to remember, Africa is the most resource-rich land base on the planet Earth. And Africa has more natural resources than the rest of the world combined. Africa has more natural resources than Europe, North America, South America, and Asia combined. Don't take our word for it. You can easily Google that and find that out for yourself. And that's the reality. So, because of that, when we talk about natural resources, we're talking about rare earth minerals that come out of the ground that provide the mechanism through the conversion through technological means to uh, provide us what we need to live and develop the way we do, right? The ability to have internet results from rare earth minerals. The ability to have cell phones and laptop computers and flat screen TVs and to charge them and plug them in and all of these things, and the batteries in your cars when you have electric cars, all of these things exist due to rare earth minerals. The ability to have lights, to put gasoline in your vehicle, even to build the vehicle, to have the mechanisms to have steel and zinc to build the vehicle, rubber for the tires, chrome for the wheels. All of those things come from the earth originally before their conversion. And Africa has more of those things and many others. Diamond, gold, we can go on and on. We talk about it all the time. The three-fourths of the chocolate consumed in the United States comes from Ghana. We can go on and on with that. Rare earth minerals, these things come out of the earth and they're brutally and viciously exploited by international capital, not to benefit the people who live in the areas where these resources are, but to enrich the pockets of multinational corporations. So even though countries like the Congo and Mozambique and Zambia and Zimbabwe, they produce the overwhelming amount of lithium for the car batteries, of cobalt for being able to have a battery in your phone that can be charged, your cell phone, and everything else, even though they produce the overwhelming majority of access to those resources that allow you to do those things every day. The though that the richness from you being able to buy this phone and charge it, buy this electric car and drive it, that goes into the pockets of Tesla and Toyota and Ford and Chevrolet and Honda, Lexus and all of these people, Apple and Motorola and Samsung. They get the riches from that. The people in the Congo, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Zambia, they don't get anything from that. In fact, they have a sum zero total because the lands are viciously exploited. When they exploit these lands to uproot these rare earth minerals, they don't take care of the land. They're not trying to uh, ensure that the land is salvageable where people can live for hundreds of years from now. They don't care. They go in and ravage the land to get the resources. They're trying to get the money now, the quick dollar, so that because they know they can come back and exploit another area later. So they don't even worry about that. And there's no oversight because the way neo-colonialism works is that the situation is set up so that the presidents of these countries in Africa, their sole purpose is to provide access to these multinational corporations to come in, ravage the resources, and leave. And the only thing they have to do to be able to do that is ensure that the leaders who are handpicked to sit in positions of power in these countries have money, are given mansions, have Mercedes Benzes and Rolls Royces, can send their children to school in the United States and Europe. That's all that they have to do to ensure that they have access to these resources. Meanwhile, the masses, the overwhelming majority of people in Africa have nothing. And then you ask the question, well, what does that have to do with those of us of African descent, Africans who are not born in Africa? Well, it has everything because that system can only work. Imagine this: there are 50 million Africans in the United States, right? There are 100 million Africans in Brazil. There are Africans in Canada. There are Africans everywhere in the world. There are a large number of Africans in Britain, in France, in Germany, in Belgium, in Portugal. If we had a pan-African consciousness in these countries, and we understood that our interests are better served by being connected to what happens to Africa and not seeing ourselves as connected to what happens here in the United States of America. If we understood that, if we understood that our role is to destabilize the United States of America so that we can gain power for our mother Africa, and not that our role is to defend the United States of America. That's my role, is to defend America. This is my country. And all I'm doing is, when I say that, is I'm not defending my people. I'm not defending any people that are mass in this society. I'm defending international capital. So it makes sense, if you understand it like that, that it completely serves the interests of imperialism to have us believe that we are American and our interests are with the interests of America. And we don't need to care or pay attention to what happens to Africa. And we certainly don't need to identify with it. Going back to the picture of Cameron, who, he's representative of millions of us in this country. Never read a book on it. I don't even know the clown, but I can guarantee you has never read a single paragraph about African history. Never read anything like that. Doesn't know anything about it. Doesn't know any of the history. Doesn't have any understanding of the struggle that's been waged so that he's able to be alive today, in a comfortable position. How many of our people struggled to a lot and had no understanding of any of that? Just the only thing that someone like him has is a celebrity status, an internet account, and a mouth to vomit out whatever comes to his small, feeble-minded brain. That's all he has. And the rest of us don't even have the celebrity status. We have everything else. We have the feeble-minded brain. We have an internet account. and we have a mouth that vomits out whatever we vomit out of it, but we don't even have the celebrity status. And so this is why this is an issue today. Why we're so comfortable. I ain't no African. And, anytime anyone defines themselves in the negative, then that tells you all you need to know about how unconscious they are, right? If someone approached you and said, I ain't no human being, then there's nowhere else they can go with you. You're at that point, you're not like, oh, okay, well, tell us what type of being you are. You like, I want to get as far away from this entity as I possibly can. Because clearly it's not a positive to define yourself in the negative. That has to mean that you represent something that's not in the best interest of yourself and everybody else around you. Even if you don't understand what that is, that doesn't make it any less true. So this is the problem with this type of backward consciousness, lack of consciousness that we have. And that's why we have to understand it in order to understand what's happening in Guinea-Bissau and the rest of Africa. And also, by understanding what's happening in Guinea-Bissau and the rest of Africa, we can better understand ourselves because it's all the same system. And that's why when we talk about the core issues of the day, like all of Africa, there's been a scramble to control Guinea-Bissau for regional resource control reasons since the Portuguese were kicked out in the anti-colonial war in the early to mid 1970s. And for example, for several years, Guinea-Bissau has been used by drug cartels. And I'm talking about drug cartels here in the Americas, right? In South America, in places like Colombia. Guinea-Bissau has been used, it served as a transit hub for cocaine shipments to Europe. So what that means is that these entities set up shop in Guinea-Bissau and they use that as a way to transport these drugs to the European continent. And in order to do that, if you can imagine for a minute, several things would have to be in place. Number one, you would have to have a mechanism of instability. You would have to have a mechanism of instability because that's the only way you could create and sustain something like large amounts of drugs being transported through a country is ensuring that the country was unstable. And, if you go to Guinea-Bissau, and I've been there, you see immediately the spirit of the people. The people there, I've been all over Africa. The people there are some of the warmest, most wonderful people you could ever meet. When I was there in Bissau 3 years ago, I wanted a hat. Like in the previous slide, I'll go back to it. The hat that Amilcar Cabral is wearing, I wanted one of those hats. Now, I did not know that the PAIGC, when they welcomed us as new members of the PAIGC, those of us in the APRP, they awarded us, um, each of us, one of those hats. But that didn't happen towards the end of the time we were there. So I didn't know that was going to happen. So I was out on the street walking around trying to find one of those hats that, only way I knew to identify it was a Milcar Cabral hat, the hat that Milcar Cabral wore, because he always wore one of those hats. And a lot of people in the country today continue to wear those hats. So I wanted one. And I'm walking around on the streets. And, in Africa, you can walk around on the streets. You can't do that in this free and democratic country that we live in here. You get robbed if you walk around the streets at night. But in Africa, you can walk around the streets at night. And, I did it often. Every time I go to Africa, I was walking around by myself. And I was walking around down in central Bissau. And I'm going through the marketplaces looking for a hat. And I wasn't finding one. And this African saw me walking back and forth. And so he approached me, and, the language barrier was there, but he's trying to ask me, like, how can he help? And I told him I want, they told me how to say hat. I can't remember now, but how to say the word hat in Portuguese. So I kept saying that word, and I kept saying Amilcar Cabral, and the word that translated to hat. And he was like, oh, okay. So he said, basically motioned me, follow him. I mean, we walked for about a mile, you all. And he took me to, bless this brother. He took me to a barber shop. He interpreted it to mean that I wanted a haircut. And, I tried my best to explain, I don't have any hair. I don't want a haircut. I wanted one of the hats. And I didn't get a hat that day. Of course, as I mentioned, I got the hat eventually, which I wear proudly often. But my point is that this is the reality in Africa. The people in Guinea-Bissau, the warmest, the most wonderful people. Try to get somebody to walk with you, you don't know, to take you somewhere a whole mile in this backward ass country. Even if they understand every word that you're saying, it's not going to happen. And if someone does offer to walk you a mile here, you got to be worried about what they got in store for you. That's just how backward this society is. But you have to have instability to be able to set up that kind of reality where, the drug cartels can operate like that. Now, of course, the PAIGC today in 2026 is still a major threat to this neo-colonialism that allows these drug cartels and this kind of criminality and the exploitation of the resources, human and material, all of that to continue to exist. The PAIGC is a constant threat to that. And as I've said on this program multiple times, I understand how the PAIGC is a threat. When I was there, we went around to the various locations where communities where people lived, and there were hundreds of people. Like the PAIGC has mass support in Guinea-Bissau. I saw it with my own eyes, no question about that. So they are, without question, a threat to imperialism, and it's due to their desire, their continued focus on the self-determination of people in Guinea-Bissau and the self-determination of Africa and the self-determination of all Africans everywhere on the planet Earth. This is a threat to international imperialism, right? All the places I've been in Africa, the people in Guinea-Bissau had one of the highest levels of Pan-African consciousness. That consciousness exists everywhere. Like, as if you've been paying attention, I was just in Azania, or what you call South Africa, 2 months ago, and there was certainly a high level of Pan-African consciousness. I'm talking about just the people on the streets. There was certainly a high level of Pan-African consciousness there, but I haven't really seen it to the level. And in other places I've been, like Ghana, certainly it exists there. But Guinea-Bissau was really at a totally different level. Like, people understood clearly, like when they saw me, they knew where I was from. They understood clearly, like they do all over the continent, but on a different level. For most people on the continent, it's like, yeah, you're African, you belong here. That's not even a discussion. Like everybody knows that. Wherever you go in Africa, contrary to what you've been told here in this backward cesspool, that's the truth. And if you ever go there, you'll see that for yourself firsthand. As soon as you get off the plane, that'll be very out. You'll realize I've been bamboozled. They've been lying to me all these years. You'll know that immediately. That's not even anything I need to say anything more about. But the difference in Guinea-Bissau is that people understand it on that level, but then there's also the next level of we got to do something to bring unity to our people all over the world. So there's self-consciousness. There's consciousness all over Africa. Yeah, we're all Africans. You're African. You belong here. But there's more. I experienced more self-consciousness in Guinea-Bissau, where people were more like, yes, we need to engage this fight to liberate our people, liberate our continent, and liberate our people. So my point, you all, is this is a big danger to international imperialism. Imagine if that level of self-consciousness existed in dominantly throughout Africa. If it existed dominantly throughout African people everywhere in the world, the imperialism's days would be numbered. So this is their concern. So of course, neo imperialism is going to use neo-colonialism to focus on continuing to ensure that Guinea-Bissau remains unstable. That's very important. They don't want that type of consciousness to spread. That's a death knell for international imperialism. So we go back to 2023, and what happened in Guinea-Bissau is that the PAIGC led the effort to build a political coalition in the country called the PAI Terra Coalition. And in 2023, national elections were held in Guinea-Bissau to gain political power, to bring the PAIGC back to political governorship in the country. And the country was led by this man, Umaro Sissoco Embalo. And he was the neo-colonial president. You know, again, like I mentioned, his role in the country was to make sure international capitalism had unfettered access to everything. And in doing so, his picture's at the bottom of the screen there. In doing so, you know, he's provided resources and riches, and that's how neo-colonialism works. So the election happened. And when the election happened in the early part of the summer in 2023, the PAIGC had a mandate in the election. They won 54 of the 102 National Assembly seats in the June 2023 national election. So what should happen next is that those 54 PAIGC delegates should have been seated as National Assembly members. Now, the National Assembly in Guinea-Bissau is the equivalent of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate here in this backward cesspool. It's the national legislature in Guinea-Bissau. And they won over 50% of the seats, right? They won, and you know how that works. Even in this backward cesspool, even on paper, you know, if you have the majority in the House or the Senate, then you have the ability to ride out most of the legislative decisions. Now, you know, there's so much technology and backwardness that happens in this system. You can't really, it's not, you know, it doesn't happen that easily, but that's on paper, that's how it's supposed to work. So you, at least if you know that, you can understand that by winning 54 seats, they won the majority of the national legislature. And then the initial count, and you know, these elections are overseen by international observers, they call them, people from the United Nations, people from all these organizations. And none of those organizations are friends to Africa and African people, but they do this international observation. And these folks confirm the National Assembly election results. They also confirm that Domingos Peirera, the brother in the top left picture, the president of the PAIGC, that he won the national election for president by almost 100,000 votes in the country, that he won the election. But despite the international observers who are no friends to the PAIGC, no friends to the AAPRP, no friends to Guinea-Bissau or Africa, no friends to any of us, even though they all acknowledged the election was held in an honorable fashion, Embalo came back and said, no, the election was unfair. So they invalidated the election. As the president of the country, which he didn't have the legal authority to do, but he did it anyway, because in neo-colonialism, you do whatever the master tells you to do. So they invalidated the election, and they didn't run the National Assembly election again. I don't believe that happened, but they did run the national presidential election again. And mysteriously, in the second time, Embalo won by about 80,000 votes over Domingos Peirera. And this time, the international observers reported numerous violations of democracy, numerous violations of ensuring that the election was fair and just, that they didn't report the first time. So clearly, it was a scam to ensure that the neo-colonialist president Embalo was able to stay in office, right? And this was despite the PAI Terra Coalition, you know, winning the 53% of the National Assembly seats in the popular vote. They were never seated. To this day, they have never been seated. 3 years later, those 54 electoral victors have not been seated, right? And not only that, but Embalo stayed in the position of president, even though clearly he didn't win the election. What happened after that is the PAIGC and comrade brother Peirera called for mass protests, and that happened. Hundreds of thousands of people hit the streets in Guinea-Bissau, and Embalo responded with massive police reaction, overreaction, violence against peaceful protesters. And Using that as an excuse, the peaceful protest as an excuse, Embalo dissolved the National Assembly rather than seat the legitimately elected people. He just dissolved the National Assembly. And, this, of course, put him in full power to make decisions because they didn't have a legislature anymore. Um, Guinea-Bissau's constitution prohibits the president from having the authority to dissolve the National Assembly for the first 12 months of that National Assembly's existence. And that's the period we're talking about. So again, he didn't have legal authority to do that, but he did it anyway. Okay. And what happened several months ago is because of the PAIGC and the other members of the PAI Terra Coalition fighting to expose all of these things I'm talking about, the protests continued. And several months ago, Comrade Brother Domingos Peirera was arrested and placed in prison. And that's been several months. He's still in prison today. In Bissau, I believe. He's still in prison today, though, simply for calling out the contradictions. There's no crimes that could be accused of the brother. If you study his history, he has a remarkable history of integrity in terms of leading the PAIGC and leading the struggle. I got a chance to meet the brother, shake his hands. He handed me my PAIGC credentials. I had a chance to meet this brother. I wouldn't, you couldn't pay me to want to meet the leader of the Democratic Party in this country, the leader of the Republican Party. You can pay me money. You can pay me $50,000 to be in the same room with any of these goddamn bastards here. But I actually had a chance to meet this brother, and I've studied the history. I know his integrity. I know the integrity of the PAIGC. And so this is what these people want to prevent from happening, right? This is what they want to ensure doesn't happen. So what that means, you all, is that today, Comrade Peirera remains in prison. Today, Guinea-Bissau remains in upheaval because of this. Today, the cartels are still permitted to operate basically with impunity, right? So what the question you have to ask yourself, whenever you have questions about anything going on in the world, in your personal life, whatever it may be, the fundamental question you have to ask yourself is who benefits by what's happening? You've got to train yourself to understand how to ask that question and where to go to get the answers to that question. So when you talk about what's happening with Iran right now, you got to ask that question. If you don't know all the history, now, myself, I've read a lot. I understand. I can tell you a lot about the history of the country of Iran, but you don't have to know that. It's not. It's good if you know it, but it's not. Don't. No one has said you have to know that to have a perspective on what's happening with Iran. But you do have to ask that question: who benefits? And if you ask that question and you begin to analyze the data available to you, you can come up with your own answer. For example, clearly, the people of Iran don't benefit by what's happening right now. They're not benefiting. The people on the streets of Tehran and all of the country of Iran, they're not benefiting. You know that. I mean, only an absolute fool would argue that they're benefiting, right? And I say that meaning that you have to understand how to evaluate um, what the sentiment is in a country. You can't just look at some people from Iran who live in the United States of America or in Europe and who, benefit from privilege and prestige, people from Venezuela, people from Cuba who benefit from uh, uh, all of these things that imperialism has provided them. You can't look at them, the small number of them, and base your assessment on that. You can just look at the people on the streets and make a determination. So clearly, the people in Iran are not benefiting. Clearly, in terms of this country targeting Iran, the people in this country, the mass of people in this country are not benefiting. How are they benefiting from, and this is, gets to the core of this contradiction about the U.S. military. I mean, some of you all continue to, we'll talk like we're talking, and you'll be like, yeah, I can't disagree with that. And then as soon as you see some of these goddamn people, thank you for your service, like you're full of shit. You're full of absolute shit. You're such a goddamn coward. You can't even just not even do that because you're so eager to fit in and be validated by this backward ass system. I mean, you make me want to vomit in your face with that bullshit. But the reality is that you cannot even argue that any of this bullshit benefits people in this country. And I'm saying that directly. The U.S. military is in Iran, in that region, fighting, and you're saying thank you for your service, but yet you cannot even articulate how them being over there is helping you do a goddamn thing. You're paying $25 a gallon for gasoline because of this bullshit. You're paying so much more for your food. You're unable to have any type of economic security. So there's no question that not only is none of that nonsense helping you, it's making your life harder. But yet you still thank you for your service. I mean, what a fucking idiot that would do that. I'm sorry, but that's what it is. It's stupid. And some of us are sick of that stupidity. And we just are going to tell you how it is because that's the only way we can get your attention is we got to talk to you. I mean, I wish it was an easier way. I've tried every other kind of way. Well, we have to reasonably think about this, but that doesn't work, So that's the problem right now. And what has to happen to correct that is that we, meaning all of us, have to decide that we're going to take a different approach to analyzing the world. And we can't just keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So instead of that, why don't we try something different? Why don't we say, let me look at this from the standpoint of the oppressed masses? If I see something happening in Guinea-Bissau or Sierra Leone or Zimbabwe or Ethiopia or the Western Sahara or anywhere in Africa, the first thing I need to ask myself is who is benefiting from that? Who is benefiting? If I see upheaval in Nigeria, if I see these racist bastards talking about they're slaughtering Christian people in Nigeria, who benefits from that analysis? If I see these same racist bastards talking about white colonial thieves in Azania, South Africa are being killed systematically, who benefits from that analysis? And you already know the answer. As soon as I said, you know the answer. You know that no African people in Azania are benefiting from that. You know that. You know who's benefiting from it. So this is what the way we have to train ourselves to think. And then once we do that, then we have to start honestly saying, what can I do to impact that in a positive way? Because each and every one of us can do something. You don't have to go to Guinea-Bissau. You don't have to do that. You don't have to, nobody's saying you have to go over to Guinea-Bissau undercover and make an attempt to liberate Brother Domingos Peirera from prison. That's not what we're talking. This is not TV. This is not the movie theater. We're not asking you to be an adventurous superhero. What we're saying is that you got to decide what you can do. Maybe it starts with you just reading a book. I'm sitting here, I have in front of me, because we're reading this book again in our cadre circle, Unity and Struggle, Amilcar Cabral. Maybe it's just that simple. You read something by Cabral's writings, Unity and Struggle, Return to the Source, something of that impact. You do that. Maybe it's that you decide every month, I'm going to give $5 to an organization fighting for Africa. It could be the AAPRP. It should be. Maybe that's what you do. And then you don't just stop there. You don't say, well, I've done enough. I don't need to do any more. And then you take on the mission. I'm going to let other people know so that they can do it. I mean, even if someone did that, just said, I'm going to get a little more information about the situation. I'm going to ask myself who benefits. I'm going to get a little more information about it. I'm going to decide that I'm going to support people working against that, and I'm going to let other people know so they can do the same. Even that little bit will cost you about 20 minutes out of your week at the very most, and you'll be making a significant contribution. So we want to make that a call to action for you to do that. You don't have to ask anybody else's permission. You don't have to wait for anything. You don't have to say, I'm going to get started as soon as January 1st comes so I can make a New Year's resolution to do it that I'm not going to follow through on. You can do that. If you're serious, you can do that today. And we just encourage you to do that. And we ask you to join us. We thank you for joining us today. We ask you to join us next week, April 19th. We have the wrong topic there. I'm very sorry. It was confusion. Actually, what we're going to talk about next week is we're going to provide further evidence. We're going to do the program on Freddie Gray, but not next week. Next week, we're going to talk about further evidence that the U.S. empire is facing imminent collapse. Further evidence that the U.S. empire is facing imminent collapse. That's the program next Sunday. Boy, I'm sorry, I'm very tired right now. Sunday, April 19th. So join us for that. The QR code in the upper left-hand corner, APRP programs, this one and others, the Forward Ever shop, you can get clothes that reflect these African sentiments. So we want to invite you to do that. Tell other people to do that as well. Go to Hood Communist. You can do that. It's a revolutionary Pan-African blog. So we invite you to do all those things. Again, if you're in the Sacramento area, we invite you to come out to our community self-defense classes every Thursday, 6 p.m. The address is 2775 Cottage Way, like cottage cheese, 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15. Unit 15, come on out. You don't have to register. We're practicing self-defense moves. We're practicing offensive moves to defend yourself. And we're studying. This past Thursday, we talked about understanding how the credit system works. So we always have something good for you, your mind and your body. So if you're in Sacramento, spread the word. And if you're not, spread the word. For people, you know people around here. Everybody want to be in California, so you know folks. So go ahead and tell them. If people hate on California, that's because, anytime somebody's hating on something, that's because that's what they wish they were. Those of us, we know that. This is beautiful. The indigenous people have beautiful land all over here, but California is at the top of the list. And so, people out here, so let them know. And then African Liberation Day, as Shakur mentioned, is coming up. There's a flyer on the screen. That is the flyer for our Oakland event here in Oakland, California, United Snakes, on May 23rd, 1 to 4 p.m. So we want to invite you to go there. And then if you look to the right, you can donate, as Shakura mentioned, to African Liberation Day. Venmo, it's A-APRP at APRP. So go ahead and donate what you can, even if it's just $5. Your money goes not to our Oakland event. We finance that out of our pockets. It goes towards all of the African Liberation Day commemorations that we will hold all throughout the African continent. We'll have them all over Africa. And so we want you to, please donate so that folks can, we can have the resources over there. We want you to join the APRP. You can do that by going to www.aprp-intl.org and the QR code on the bottom right. For our work in the Sahel region, we ask you to become a monthly sponsor to that. So maybe you donate $5 to ALD. Maybe you become a monthly sponsor to the Sahel work with $10, $15 a month. You got 15. You can't be in capitalism without $15 in a month. So make that commitment. These are the things we're talking about. And then my book, last thing, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. It's a very good book. There's plenty of reviews. If you don't believe me, the QR code is right there. So please buy it. It's only $8. I'm not going to be on Oprah Winfrey's book list. I'm not going to be on Reese Witherspoon's book list. They don't have books like this on their book list. The only way people are going to know about this book is if you tell them. If you don't tell them, they're not going to know. So please help us do this work. If you have the book, we thank you. But tell someone else. Call your library, have them put it in there. Call your bookstores in your area. Ask them, it's only $8 so they can get it, sell it for $10, and they'll make a lot of money. And that's a great thing. 100% of the proceeds go towards the anti-fascist work. Yesterday, I did a weapons training here in Sacramento. Took people through safety of handling weapons, how to deal with that. You know, these are young people, they don't have money, so I have to help them in terms of ammunition. Ammunition is not cheap. Targets, eye and ear wear, all that stuff. Cleaning supplies for the weapons we used. So I pay for that out of pocket. So if you buy the book and you tell people, that helps us be able to train more people. Help us do the work. Help us. That's all of our responsibility. Forward ever. Have a great rest of your day.